is actually a good microcosm of the whole debate. And actually what John said about mentioning COVID is a good example of this. First of all, the figure 97% of all scientists agree, independent of the study that he mentioned. Richard Toll, a lead United Nations scientist, looked into that and found that it quite literally was pulled from thin air. There was no data to support the 97%. Another study had a survey of over 10,000 scientists, whittled them down to 77 anonymous scientists, asked the question essentially, is the Earth warming, are humans causing it or a big part of it, and or humans warming potentially affecting the climate. 75 out of 77 answered yes, or 77 out of 79, creating this 97%, but we don't know who the scientists are. The other thing you'll hear is that every National Academy of Science, the National Academy of Science, the American Geophysical Union, the American Meteorology, all these scientists, tens of thousands, all agree that climate's a problem. That sounds impressive and scary until you look behind the curtain. Behind the curtain finds the governing boards of these organizations, 24 or so governing board members vote on these climate statements. The rank and file know nothing about it. In the case of the American Meteorological Society, some surveys have shown up to 75% of the rank and file meteorologists are skeptical, but the 24 governing board members speak for them all. And in addition, the American Geophysical Union had a huge rebellion when they tried to do their climate statement years ago. The National Academy of Science, started by Abraham Lincoln, this august science body, how could it be wrong? It is literally 100% funded by government, state and local government. During the cap and trade debate with President Obama, it spent millions of dollars lobbying for cap and trade proposals by the government, our National Academy of Sciences. A man named Ralph Cicero used to run it. It's a completely political. Richard Lindzen had said, if the United States government pays the National Academy of Sciences to say there's a climate problem, by golly, they're going to get their money's worth. And that's what they do. So he mentioned the studies, and we've looked at all of these things. All of these studies, though chiefly a lot of them are modeling studies or some data study, when they claim climate change is real or they accept the narrative, it's an author usually at the end of a study putting some boilerplate line in because they don't want to be deplatformed. And I want to bring up COVID for a second just to say very simply, to cite these kind of authorities or stuff like that is kind of like saying, well, Fauci said it or the World Health Organization said it, so therefore you can't agree. And by the way, that's the exact position of Google, Facebook, and all that. So our point here is climate is hundreds of factors. Not only is there no climate crisis, but we have to go to the heart of this. And the heart of this is what Benji said. There's no debate among young people. Well, gee, what should we do then? I guess we'll just tell them we agree and then we'll come up with our own conservative solutions. No, there's a reason young people are so indoctrinated into climate fear. It's because the old people for 30 years at Gallup polling never showed a concern for climate. All of a sudden, the climate activists got real and said, let's go after young people. They're more gullible. And that's how they were able to convince a whole generation of young people that climate is a problem. We shouldn't appease them. We should show young people how they're wrong. And in terms of solutions, nothing that's been proposed by the United Nations, by the Green New Deal, by the US Congress, would have any impact on global emissions, let alone carbon dioxide. So if we did face a climate crisis, we'd all be doomed if we had to rely on that. And taking that one last step further, if we had to rely on tree planting or carbon capture, maybe someday technology will come through to do something on that. But essentially, this is a semantic argument. But the biggest thing is, and I guess my biggest concern was Benji sat beside Greta Thunberg at a congressional hearing in 2019, turned to Greta and thanked her for raising awareness of the climate issue for young people across the world. To me, that was horrific. Greta Thunberg has done more to instill alarm in young people in unscientific nonsense than any person on the globe. She shouldn't be thanked, she should be challenged. Thank you.
Minutes for questions. Just a couple things. Again, the 97% figure that. Yep, I'm going to just 1 second. So again, this convergence of evidence from independent lines of inquiry. It's not like these scientists know each other. They work in different fields. They publish in different journals. It's not like they're meeting on the weekends or have some collective delusion that they inculcate. They're independent of each other, which gives us a higher confidence that
no one's independent in the climate science. Just like COVID scientists who didn't support lockdowns, uninvited, deplatformed, shut down. Same happens in climate. There is a complete groupthink and terror of even even scientists who are tenured to speak out and dissent in any way on this issue. So that's just not true, Mike. We can't say that.
Your analogy with COVID and climate science is, by maybe 30 years of this convergence of evidence. COVID is 30 months.
No, 30 years of the United Nations corrupting it beginning in 1988.
Respond.
Well, let's go to Benji. Go ahead.
We're debating Mr. Shermer, not the other panel.
That's right. Go ahead, Benji. Right.
I find it funny that sitting next to Greta at a congressional hearing and providing conservative alternative to Greta is the problem for you. I think we need I would argue that we need a few more of me and a few less of the alarmists, wouldn't you say? And I think that there's a reason why you weren't invited to speak at that panel, and it's because he's called, hey Mark, you're really good at interrupting, you're really bad at listening. I listened when you were talking, so let me talk for a second. I sat next to Greta Thunberg instead of you because you cherry pick the science in a way that is very harmful to the people in this audience and the people in America who have been misled by you and James cherry picking data through sources that are not real, or you are saying things that the science understands. I'll take something that James said earlier about the lack of droughts. There is no climate scientist in this country who believes that there will be more droughts due to climate change. They say that precipitation will go up and that droughts will go down. But you say that droughts are going down as a way to debunk climate change, when that's not what the science says at all. You're using the alarmist tactics of the left to cherry pick what they're saying, which is unscientific, just like what you're saying is unscientific. Neither of you are scientists. There's a reason neither of you are scientists. Scientists have proven that greenhouse gas emissions, this is basic science that we learned in 3rd grade, that CO2 is a greenhouse gas, and the greenhouse effect is real. And when you emit more CO2 into the atmosphere, the Earth warms, point blank. That's without talking about the drastic, alarmist responses that the left has taken, which is blaming every extreme scenario on climate change. That is not real. But while we're up here debating the science, and while we're up here talking about, well, Benj is just a young guy who sat next to Greta Thunberg and thinks she's okay for talking about climate change, God forbid he goes and sits next to her, the rest of the world is moving forward with far-left climate proposals. So if you're okay with the far left continuing to dominate this narrative, good for you. But I want to save this planet. I want to keep my future a free economy. I want to save capitalism. And to do that, we need to have our stake at the conversation, our stake at the table. And we're not going to do it by peddling lies like you've been.
So I would like to respond to that. And first of all, you may not get this from the tenor here, but Benji and I, we've actually spoken before. We like each other. But in this case, no, it's not right to say that I'm cherry picking or lying about the data. What I presented, I told you in each case, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change found as they said, and the data showed what they said. Right now on your cell phone, or right after this debate, you can go to climaterealism.com. The top item, I posted it a half hour before this debate because I thought that the data and what I asserted might be questioned. You can link right there, you will see the slides, the graphics, with the objective sources, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's own chart that I copied and pasted, showing that it has been 40 years since the United States has experienced, or 40 years since 40% of the United States has experienced very dry conditions. 40 years, that's the longest period in history. The longest period in history. I also give you citations to the facts that during the past 5 years, twice we've set a record for the least amount of drought in this country. Now, what happens for folks, for Benji, when he talks about carbon dioxide is real, he's missing the point. The discussion isn't whether carbon dioxide can cause global warming. The issue isn't whether temperatures have warmed in the past 100 years. I told you that earlier. The question is, what's the context, what's the impact? Yeah, we're causing a little warming's happening. We're still below average in terms of temperature for human civilization, the time period of human civilization. That's what's important. If we're not creating a crisis, thank you.
All right.
If we're not creating a crisis, then why are we going to impair the United States economy? Why are we going to restrict human freedom and human choices for our energy sources?
You don't have to.
And if you have a way to reduce the size of government and enhance human choice, then tell us what they are specifically.
Right, here's great, yeah. So sadly, the left would love the fact that we're fighting right now, okay? We need to agree on what the path forward is. So I want to make one point about James' organization, and this is a tactic that we cannot do to each other. Back 10 years ago, the Heartland Institute put a billboard up that said, "I still believe in global warming, do you?" And it was a picture of the Unabomber. So that was, again, in fairness to James, before his time, but a very ineffective, counterproductive.
And I certainly hope I get a chance to respond to that.
Yeah, and you can. But here's the point: is that we don't, this back and forth about who's the true conservative, totally unproductive, totally not what we should be fighting about. So because here's the answer: our ideas, our solutions are far more effective. So has anybody seen the movie Armageddon? You know, Bruce Willis, Liv Tyler, remember that? About the asteroid coming to the Earth. Okay, so the Green New Deal is their plan. In order to go to that asteroid, they don't want to fly right at the asteroid and blow it up. They want to do Medicare for all. They want to do universal basic income. They want to go on all these detours. Well, first of all, before you take off, you got to mask up, and you have to go through this regulatory regime to even make sure the spaceship is safe. Okay, so I would say the risk says I think there's probably an asteroid somewhere. I don't know what the odds are we're going to get hit by it. It's not an imaginary risk. There is some risk, but our spaceship, our solution, my idea is why don't we cut the size of government in half? If you think there's a crisis, AOC, are you willing to defund the Department of Education and use that money for nuclear reactors? Are you willing to let go and reprioritize money? And that's the fight we need to be having. We need to be defining what our vision looks like, what our spaceship looks like. And that's is where I think we agree on probably 99% of that.
Let's go with 3.5 minutes. Your response, and then Benji, you finish this up.
Well, that's okay. We'll take the Q&A from the audience. But John, I didn't bring up your organization. I didn't bring up your funding. I didn't bring up the tweets that your organization and Benji have made that have been extremely aggressive against conservatives. If you want to go there, we can. But I'd like to work together.
I don't criticize conservatives.
Let's just do the substantive.
Just real quick, let me comment on Benji and the unscientific claims and all that. Climate skeptics look at the big picture. And what I mean by that is, if you read a book by Michael Mann or a UN scientist or a mainstream media figure, you're just going to get one narrative with literally no dissent or a caricature of a dissent. I have a book out, Green Fraud, right now. I quote Roger Pilkey Jr., Michael Schellenberger, Bjorn Lomborg. You know who I quote by the most? It's Michael Moore, the left-wing filmmaker, railing about the solar and wind power and all the follies of that. But what's interesting here is we look at the whole picture. I have former Nobel Prize-winning scientists endorse my book. I go through the United Nations scientists who turned against the UN. Every data point he mentioned drought. Put on any news outlet and they're talking about droughts are worse. This is a condition of global warming. Listen to anything Michael Mann says, the climate science. You can look outside and see weather from your room. So with Benji's, the thing I would like to help Benji with, if it's possible, he's got a great message about conservatism and wealth, free markets creating wealth, which creates cleaner environments. He just seems to want to appease or give up on young people and just say, okay, well, they believe it, polls show it, so let's not argue. Let's do that and let's steer them to this solution. Well, first of all, you should say the way forward, because you can't solve a non-problem. In other words, John Kerry has admitted this. Joe Biden has admitted this. Even if the United States went to zero tomorrow, it wouldn't make a difference because of the developing world on emissions if you're so afraid of CO2. What I would say is submit to Benji. I have a whole chapter in my book, Green Fraud, on Europe, our future if we follow it. They're facing energy only when it's available, blackouts. They're facing a disaster. France is banning short-haul flights because of their version of a climate lockdown, and you can take a train or a bus. You can't waste money on a plane. In the US, they want to declare a climate emergency. Look at Europe, because about 15 years ago, European conservatives gave up fighting the science claims of the big organizations, and they've appeased, and they are way further along the Green New Deal path than we are. So
okay,
I don't know why we have to appease them.
The issue, I would agree with Mark on a couple things that are really important. The issue of climate change is increasingly an issue of China change. China is producing more greenhouse gas emissions than all the developed world combined. Why don't we unite and tackle that problem? The Green New Deal totally ignores the issue of global emissions.
So we just need to ask China, say please, and then we'll unite.
For the millions.
Benji, finish this up.
Thank you, sir. We have two options. There's a lot to unpack in this conversation, but we have two options on how to move forward. 97% of NASA scientists are saying that we need to do something about climate change. Now, you can say that that number is fake or real. That number could be 60%, 40%. If we do something in an economically free, in a capitalist way to fight climate change and retake the narrative from the left, the best case is that we solve climate change and protect our environment and clean up our air. The worst case is that we clean up our air. And both cases improve our economy and protect our environment at the same time. That's why we need to retake this issue, because no matter what the risk is, if we stand up and say our solutions work and we can do it within our values, it doesn't even matter if climate change is real, because we'll be improving the environment and saving the economy at the same time and taking this issue away from China. So we can continue down the path of peddling this sort of, oh, we gotta fight the fight and tell young people that they're wrong. But look, young people aren't gonna change their opinion on this, and so we can go the right way or the wrong way. And as a conservative that wants to fight for the future of this country, I like to go the right way.
All right, thank you, time's up. Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks for coming.